This week's Human Rights Update looks at the UN Security Council's meeting on peace and security in the Middle East, as the war in Gaza continues to increase tensions in the region. The U.S. military reports there has been a rise in attacks against U.S. military facilities in the Middle East as Israel's war against Hamas continues. There have been some 165 attacks on United States facilities in Syria and Iraq, as the U.S. is a longtime ally of Israel. The U.S. has since launched retaliatory strikes against bases in Syria belonging to groups backed by Iran. A U.S. representative to the UN claimed that the narrowly tailored strikes were in the name of self-defense and were not connected to the Israel-Hamas war. Nevertheless, attacks on American military bases in the region continues as the war in Gaza continues. Turning to Lebanon, Israel's military has been engaged in cross-border fighting with Hezbollah and has launched repeated air raids on southern Lebanon since the 7th of October, further raising fears of the Israel-Palestine conflict spilling over into the wider region. In a statement, Israel's army claimed that it hit dozens of Hezbollah posts, military structures, and weapon infrastructure. The tensions between Israel and Hezbollah have led to mass evacuations of citizens in northern Israel and southern Lebanon. Moving on, the Israeli government alleges that 12 UNRWA employees were involved in the attacks on 7th of October. The United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine refugees in the Near East supports the relief and human development of Palestinian refugees. Following these allegations, multiple nations stopped their contributions to the agency. Martin Griffiths, the Under-Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordination, said that our humanitarian response for the occupied Palestinian territory is completely dependent on UNRWA being adequately funded and operational. The UNRWA is not only a social service provider, but it's also a reminder that the Palestinian refugee crisis of 7 decades has not been solved yet. This is not the first attempt to delegitimize the agency and cut its funding. However, a shortage of fundings will have fatal consequences for the current humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Lastly, the war in Gaza has also played a role in the British and American airstrikes on Yemen since 12th of January, as Yemen's Houthi fighters carried out non-fatal attacks on commercial ships passing through the strategically important Bab el-Mandeb Strait, which allows for 12% of all global trade to pass through. Israeli-bound and Israeli-owned ships have been targeted by the Houthis, who say they will stop the attacks if Israel agrees to a ceasefire in Gaza or allows sufficient humanitarian aid in. However, the attacks also impacted the shipping costs of trade and caused significant delays, prompting Western countries to react, and the airstrikes against Houthi footholds in Yemen. Thank you for tuning in to this week's Human Rights News Updates. For more human rights news and information, please go to ghrd.org or find us on social media.